The date is March 9th, 1945. The location is the Mariana Islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. On the runways of Blom, Tinian, and Saipan, the engines of 325 B-29 Superfortress bombers are turning over. The noise is deafening, a mechanical roar that shakes the palm trees and vibrates in the chests of the ground crews. But this is not a normal mission. The pilots sitting in the cockpits are terrified. They are not terrified of the Japanese, they are terrified of their orders. For the first time in the war, they have been ordered to strip the guns off their planes. They have been ordered to remove the ammunition. They have been ordered to fly at night. And most terrifying of all, they have been ordered to fly low. Not at 30,000 feet where they are safe from anti-aircraft fire, but at 5,000 feet. They are being sent into the heart of the Japanese Empire unarmed and within range of every gun in Tokyo. General Curtis LeMay, the man who issued the order, stands in the control tower watching them leave. He is chewing on a cigar. He knows that if this mission fails, he will be court-martialed. He knows that if he is wrong, he will be responsible for the greatest loss of American air power in history. But he also knows something else. He knows that the war is stalled. He knows that the high-altitude precision bombing campaign has failed. And he knows that tonight he is going to try something that has never been done in the history of warfare. He is not going to target a factory. He is not going to target a military base. He is going to target a grid on a map, a rectangle of the city measuring 4 miles by 3 miles, and he is going to burn it off the face of the earth. 3,000 miles away in Tokyo, the wind is blowing. It is a dry, cold wind coming off the mountains. The Japanese call it the akakaze, the red wind, because it usually signals the danger of fire. The city is dark. The blackout is in effect. Millions of people are sleeping in houses made of wood and paper. They do not know that 300 planes are hurtling toward them through the darkness. They do not know that inside those planes are not high-explosive bombs, but something new. Something designed in a laboratory at Harvard. Something that turns gasoline into a sticky, burning gel that cannot be extinguished. Tonight, the physics of fire will meet the fragility of wood, and the result will be a catastrophe so large that it will make the atomic bomb attacks seem small by comparison. To understand why this night happened, we have to understand the failure that preceded it. The B-29 Superfortress was the most advanced machine of World War II. It was pressurized, it had remote-controlled guns, it could fly higher and faster than any other bomber. It was designed for one specific purpose: high-altitude precision bombing. The American doctrine was simple. You fly at 30,000 feet, you use the Norden bomb sight, a computer so advanced it was a state secret. You drop a bomb into a pickle barrel. You destroy the enemy's factories without hurting the civilians next door. It was a noble idea. It was a scientific idea. And over Japan, it was a complete disaster. The problem wasn't the plane. The problem was the planet. When the B-29s arrived over Japan, they encountered a phenomenon that no one had predicted: the jet stream. At 30,000 feet over the Pacific, winds blow at 200 miles an hour. When a B-29 turned into the wind, it stood almost still in the sky. When it turned with the wind, it flew so fast that the bomb sights couldn't calculate the drop. The bombs were missing, not by feet, but by miles. They were landing in fields. They were landing in the ocean. The American war machine had spent $3 billion on a plane that couldn't hit anything. General Curtis LeMay looked at the reconnaissance photos. He saw the factory still standing. He saw the Japanese war machine still churning out Zero fighters. and he realized that the American strategy was based on a lie. In Germany, the factories were large brick buildings separated from the cities. But in Japan, the industry was different. It was the shadow factory system. A drill press in a living room, a lathe in a kitchen. Every wooden house in the working-class districts of Tokyo was a part of the assembly line. To destroy the industry, he couldn't just hit a factory. He had to destroy the city. But high explosives wouldn't work. A 500-pound bomb would blow up a house, but the house next door would remain standing. To destroy a city made of wood, you don't need an explosion. You need an infection. You need a fire that spreads. LeMay needed an incendiary weapon, but standard magnesium bombs burn too hot and too fast. They burn straight down through the floor and extinguish themselves in the dirt. He needed something that would splatter, something that would stick to walls, something that would burn long enough to catch the curtains and the tatami mats on fire.
Enter the M69 incendiary. This was not a bomb in the traditional sense. It was a masterpiece of evil chemistry, developed by the Standard Oil Company and Harvard University. The scientists realized that gasoline was the perfect fuel, but it burned too quickly. They needed to thicken it. They experimented with rubber, but rubber was scarce. Then they found a soap powder made from aluminum naphthenate and aluminum palmitate. When they mixed this powder with gasoline, it turned into a sticky brown gel. They combined the names of the chemicals, Na from naphthenate and Palm from palmitate. They called it napalm. The M69 projectile was a steel pipe about 19 inches long and 3 inches wide. It weighed only 6 pounds. It looked harmless. It looked like a piece of pipe you would find in a scrapyard. But inside, it held a cheesecloth sack filled with napalm. The engineering genius was in the delivery system. The B-29s wouldn't drop these pipes one by one. They would drop them in a cluster. A giant container called the E-46 Aimable Cluster held 38 of these M69 pipes. Here is the physics of the deployment. The B-29 drops the cluster. At 5,000 feet, a chyme fuse blows the cluster open. The 38 M69s are released into the airstream. But if they just fell, they would tumble and miss. So engineers attached a long strip of cloth to the tail of each pipe. These streamers stabilized the bomb, making it fall nose down like a dart. When the M69 hit a Japanese roof, it didn't explode immediately. It smashed through the thin roof tiles. It penetrated the ceiling. It landed in the living room or the hallway. Then a 3-second delay fuse burned down. This delay was crucial. It allowed the bomb to come to a rest inside the house. Then a small charge of black powder detonated. It didn't blow the house up. It fired the sack of napalm out of the tail of the pipe like a cannon. The burning gel splattered against the walls, the furniture, and the ceiling. Napalm burns at 1,000 degrees Celsius. It sticks to everything. You cannot wipe it off. If you try to swat it, you just spread the fire. Water essentially boils off it. One M69 could burn down a house. One B-29 could carry 1,500 of them. 300 B-29s could drop 500,000. LeMay did the math. The density of Tokyo was 100,000 people per square mile. The houses were spaced 2 feet apart. If he could start enough fires simultaneously, the fire department would be overwhelmed. The individual fires would merge. They would heat the air above the city, causing it to rise violently. This would suck fresh air in from the sides, creating artificial hurricane-force winds that would feed the flames. It is a phenomenon known as a firestorm. It is a self-sustaining engine of destruction. LeMay wasn't planning a raid. He was planning to build a furnace. It is midnight. The first planes arrive over Tokyo. These are the Pathfinders. Their job is not to destroy the city, but to mark it. They fly low, navigating by the light of the moon reflecting off the rivers. They open their bomb bay doors. They drop the incendiaries. But they don't drop them at random. They drop them in a specific pattern. They create a giant flaming X in the center of the Shitamachi district. To the civilians on the ground, the X must have looked like an omen. The air raid sirens began to wail. But the people of Tokyo were tired. They had been bombed before. Usually the planes flew high and missed. Usually it was just a factory that burned. They grabbed their buckets of water. They put on their padded cotton hoods, which were supposed to protect them from the heat. They prepared to fight a few small fires. They had no idea that the X was a target marker for the apocalypse.
Then the main force arrived. The drone of 1,200 Wright Cyclone engines filled the sky. It sounded like the earth was cracking open. The B-29s came in a procession that stretched for miles. They opened their doors. The sky began to rain fire. It didn't look like bombs falling. It looked like glowing metal rain. The M69 clusters opened at 2,000 feet, and the individual pipes scattered. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Within 30 minutes, the X had expanded. It was no longer a shape. It was a sea. The individual fires merged just as the physics predicted. The wooden houses dried out by the winter wind ignited instantly. The paper walls flashed into ash. The heat rose so quickly that it created thermal updrafts that tossed the 70-ton B-29s around like leaves. Pilots reported being flipped upside down by the heat thermals rising from the city. The air inside the bombers turned hot. The smell of smoke entered the pressurized cabins. And then came a smell that the pilots would never forget. The sickly sweet smell of burning flesh. They were 5,000 feet in the air, and they could smell the people dying below them. On the ground, the situation went from dangerous to hopeless in minutes. The fire brigade was paralyzed. Their trucks were surrounded by flames. The water pressure failed as the pipes melted. The people began to run, but where do you run when the air itself is burning? The temperature in the streets reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Asphalt boiled. The concrete of the buildings didn't just crack, it glowed red. The glass in the windows melted and ran down the walls like water. The wind, the akakaze, whipped the fire into a frenzy. It carried burning embers the size of softballs. If an ember hit a person, their clothes ignited. People shed their clothes and ran naked through the streets, carrying their children. The crowd surged toward the only safety they knew, the water. The Sumida River flows through the heart of Tokyo. Tens of thousands of people rushed toward the banks. They thought the water would save them. They were wrong. The heat was so intense that the water in the canals began to boil. People jumped in to escape the flames, only to be scalded to death. Those who stayed on the bridges were suffocated. The firestorm consumed so much oxygen that people hundreds of yards away from the flames simply fell down dead because there was no air left to breathe. It was carbon monoxide poisoning on a massive scale. The bridges over the Sumida became bottlenecks of death. The steel girders of the bridges heated up until they were too hot to touch. People were pushed against the hot metal by the crushing crowd.
American pilots looking down saw something that defied belief. They didn't see a city anymore. They saw a glowing red charcoal pit. The smoke cloud rose to 18,000 feet. The tail gunners reported that the glow of the city was visible for 150 miles after they turned back toward Saipan. One pilot wrote in his logbook that it felt like looking into the mouth of a volcano. Another said it felt like he was bombing hell itself. But amidst the horror, there were moments of strange physics. The B-29s flying low were coated in soot. The updraft was so strong that debris from the houses was thrown thousands of feet into the air. Pilots reported finding pieces of Japanese furniture, blackened receipts, and scraps of clothing lodged in their engine intakes and landing gear when they returned to base. They had literally flown through the debris of the civilization they were destroying. Dawn broke over Tokyo on March 10th, not with sunlight, but with a gray-filtered haze. The fire had burned itself out because there was nothing left to burn. The silence was absolute. Where there had been a bustling metropolis of millions, there was now a flat, scorched wasteland of ash. 16 square miles of the city were gone. Not damaged, gone, vaporized. 100,000 people were dead. To put that number in perspective, more people died in Tokyo that night than died in the atomic bombing of Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It remains the single deadliest air raid in human history. The American military had achieved its goal. The shadow factories were gone. The industrial capacity of Tokyo was cut in half overnight. But the cost was a moral stain that would haunt the commanders for the rest of their lives. General LeMay was unrepentant. He famously said, "If we had lost the war, we would all have been prosecuted as war criminals." He understood the brutality of his logic. He believed that killing 100,000 civilians to end the war one day sooner was a math equation that justified itself. He believed that war is inherently immoral, and the only moral thing to do is to end it as fast as possible by any means necessary. The Japanese survivors call it the Night of the Black Snow. The ash from the burning city fell for days, covering the surrounding countryside. The bodies in the river were so numerous that they clogged the flow of the water. They were buried in mass graves because there was no way to identify them. The heat had fused metal coins into lumps in their pockets. It had melted glass bottles into strange artistic shapes. This raid changed the American way of war. It proved that you didn't need precision if you had enough power. It paved the way for the atomic bomb. It desensitized the world to mass destruction. Before March 9th, the idea of burning a city was controversial. After March 9th, it became standard operating procedure. Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, Yokohama, all were burned in the following months using the same tactics, the same M69 jelly, and the same ruthless logic. Today, if you walk through the Shitamachi district of Tokyo, it is a modern bustling place. Concrete skyscrapers, neon lights, bullet trains. The wooden paper city is gone. But there is a small museum, a quiet place tucked away in a side street. Inside, there is a single M69 casing. It sits in a glass case. It looks like a rusty pipe. It looks insignificant. But next to it are the melted remains of a bicycle and a piece of fused glass that used to be a window. These artifacts tell the story of the night when technology triumphed over humanity. They tell the story of the night the concrete melted. The B-29s are gone. The pilots are gone. The generals are gone. But the lesson remains etched in the history of warfare. When you combine the cold logic of engineering with the fury of total war, the result is not a battle. It is an extinction event.